Think about the stories you remember most. They're not just for fun, are they? They're actually some of the most powerful teaching tools we have. They stick with us, they shape how we see the world, and maybe most importantly, they teach us the very words to describe it all. So let's dive into this hidden power together. So, how in the world do they do that, right? How does a simple story about a character's journey manage to teach us something as big and complex as language itself? It's got to be more than just finding out what happens next. Well, the answer is actually pretty straightforward. Stories are how we learn language, not just when we're kids, but our whole lives. They give words context and emotion and a meaning that you're just never going to get from a dictionary, because our brains are literally wired to learn from a good story. All right, so let's start with the most direct example you can find, when a story flat out becomes a vocabulary lesson. This is language learning in its purest form, and it's woven right into the narrative itself. Okay, so let's take a look at a story about a guy who's just lost his job. He feels, as it says here, deeply confused, totally lost, right? The story does a great job of creating this feeling of uncertainty, but it's also about to give him and us the exact words we need to find a path forward. And boom, here it is. This is where the story becomes the teacher. Right after using the word direction, the narrator straight up defines it for us. It's such a brilliant built-in vocabulary lesson that connects the word directly to that feeling of being aimless. And it's not a one-off thing. It happens again. The character decides to make a commitment to rebuild his life. And look, the story immediately clarifies what that means: a serious promise to yourself. This method is just so effective because there's no room for confusion. And just to drive the point home one more time, when he faces a setback, the story is right there to tell us, hey, this is a problem that stops or delays your progress. So the big takeaway here is that this story isn't just telling a tale, it's actively building our vocabulary one super clear definition at a time. But, what happens when a word means so much more than its definition? Let's dig a little deeper now and see how stories teach us words that carry the weight of an entire culture. See, to really get certain words, you have to understand the stories behind them. Let's take a Hindi horror story about a supernatural possession. The words here aren't just about a simple translation. They're about a whole system of belief. Now, take a look at this. A jinn isn't just a genie like in the movies. The cultural story tells us it's a powerful, often dangerous spirit. A Bhakt is way more than a devotee. This is someone with the spiritual power to actually fight that entity. And a vachan, that's not just a promise. It's a sacred, unbreakable vow, often with the spirit world itself. See? Without the story, the words are just empty shells. Okay, so let's zoom the lens out even further. If a short story can teach us cultural beliefs, then a massive epic, well, that can teach an entire society its moral language. Think back to that word promise, or commitment from our first story. It was personal, right? Something you do for yourself? But in the epic of the Mahabharata, we get the word pratigya. This is on a whole different level. It's a life-altering, destiny-shaping vow. When a character takes his pratigya, it literally sets the stage for the entire war. The word itself is an epic. And this is how an epic builds a moral dictionary for a culture. Words like dharma aren't just about duty, they're about the moral fabric of the universe. A shop isn't just a curse, it's a major plot device that can change a character's entire life. And being called a Sutputra isn't just a name, it's a label that defines your place in the world and drives one of the epic's greatest tragedies. These aren't just words, they're the building blocks of a worldview. So we've seen how stories teach us definitions, culture, and even morality. But maybe the most universal thing they teach us is the language of emotion, the language of the heart. Let's look at a romance for this. In this story, you honestly don't even need to know the plot. You can see the character's entire emotional journey just by listening to the words he uses. At the beginning, this is his entire world. His language is all about anger and resentment and revenge. His words are sharp, they're focused on one thing: getting back at the person he feels wronged him. This is his emotional ground zero. And then this happens. A total shift. The language of revenge just gets replaced by the language of commitment. Suddenly his words aren't about himself anymore. They're about her. I'll be there for you. This is the pivot point, and you can see it just in the change in his dialogue. It's incredible. And here it is, the final transformation. His language moves way beyond just commitment and into this deep, profound connection. He's not just helping her anymore. She's become a fundamental part of him. You were my eyes. That one line tells you everything. It completes his entire emotional story, showing us his heart learned a completely new language. So, from a simple definition all the way to a profound emotion, we've seen that stories are really our ultimate guide. They are what give language its actual life. I mean, we've seen it layer by layer, right? Stories can give us direct definitions when we're learning something new. They can embed these deep cultural and spiritual ideas into a single word. They build the entire moral vocabulary of a society. And they map out the universal language of human emotion, just through conversation. So at the end of the day, what this all really shows us is that to truly master a language, we need so much more than just grammar rules and vocab lists. We need stories. They're the vessels that carry the meaning, the context, and the heart of every single word we speak. So I'll just leave you with this to think about. What is the most important story you've ever been told? And what language did it teach you?